The night draped itself over the affluent neighborhood like a velvet curtain, its stillness punctuated only by the rhythmic clack of Renee Walker's leather heels. Against the cold stone pavement, she emerged from the heavy oak doors of the private club, a fortress of exclusivity tucked behind manicured hedges and wrought iron gates. The air was crisp, biting at her skin as she adjusted the strap of her sleek leather bag, her movements precise and purposeful. The faint glow of the streetlights danced across the edge of her signature red cap, a bold splash of color that crowned her with quiet defiance. She exhaled softly, her breath forming fleeting wisps in the chill, a visible trace of the fire that burned within her after the meeting she'd just left. That gathering had dragged on far longer than she'd anticipated, the clock ticking past midnight as voices rose and fell in heated debate. But the outcome, sharp, decisive, and victorious, had left her buzzing with energy. Every word she'd spoken in that room had been a carefully aimed arrow, every argument a brick laid in the foundation of her mission. This was her battlefield, not one of blood and steel, but of law and principle, where she wielded her intellect like a blade against the tangled web of systemic injustice. As she crossed the deserted street, her mind churned with the strategies they'd hammered out, legal frameworks designed to chip away at the rot embedded deep in the system. For Renee, victories were never trivial. Each case she took on sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom, stirring the waters of a society too long content to ignore its flaws. Her car waited for her, parked discreetly beside a row of neatly trimmed hedges that lined the street like silent sentinels. She was almost there, her fingers brushing the trunk's handle, when a low hum sliced through the quiet, a sound that didn't belong. Her head tilted slightly, her sharp eyes catching the glint of a patrol car creeping along the road behind her. Its pace was deliberate, unnatural, like a hunter stalking prey. The driver's gaze bored into her, a weight she could feel even from this distance. Renee's chest tightened, a flicker of unease sparking beneath her practiced calm. She'd been here before too many times to count, and she knew better than to let it show. With a measured breath, she dismissed the feeling, popped the trunk, and carefully tucked her documents inside, their edges crisp with the promise of the fight ahead. But the sensation lingered, a persistent itch at the back of her neck. She straightened, her silhouette cutting a striking figure against the dim streetlight, and glanced toward the patrol car again. It had stopped now, just a few yards away, its headlights dimmed but aimed squarely at her. The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken judgment. Renee's pulse quickened, though her face remained a mask of composure. She'd learned long ago to bury the fear, to let it simmer beneath the surface where it couldn't betray her. Slipping into the driver's seat, she closed the door with a firm thud, the sound a small act of defiance in the silence. The engine purred to life beneath her hands, steady and sure, but in the rearview mirror, the patrol car loomed like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Inside that squad car, Officer Derek Miles sat hunched over the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped it with a force born of something darker than duty. His narrowed eyes tracked Renee's every move, his breath fogging the windshield in short, angry bursts. To him, she was an anomaly, a polished black woman striding through this pristine, wealthy enclave with a confidence that grated against his worldview. And that red cap perched atop her head, it wasn't just an accessory, it was a taunt, a flare of rebellion that clashed with the muted tones of privilege surrounding them. "Who does she think she is?" he muttered, his voice a low growl that barely escaped the confines of the car. His fingers tapped an erratic rhythm against the wheel, a physical echo of the chaos swirling in his mind. Derek had spent years on this beat, patrolling these streets where manicured lawns and gleaming facades hid the unspoken rules he'd come to enforce. In his eyes, Renee didn't fit the mold of belonging here. Her presence, her very existence in this space challenged the order he'd sworn to uphold. It wasn't rational, and deep down he knew it. No crime had been committed, no suspicious behavior observed. Yet the sight of her sparked something visceral, a tangle of prejudice and resentment that had festered unchecked for far too long. That cap, that walk, that air of authority she carried, it all screamed defiance to him, a personal affront he couldn't let slide. His thoughts twisted, layering assumption upon bias until they formed a flimsy justification he could cling to. She's up to something, he told himself, the lie settling into his bones like truth. Renee, oblivious to the storm brewing in Derek's mind, reached for her keys, her movements deliberate as she prepared to leave. She paused for a moment, exhaling slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the meeting faces around the table, the nods of agreement, the weight of the cause they'd all sworn to champion. But then the night erupted. Red and blue lights exploded from the patrol car, slicing through the darkness like a blade. The siren's wail shattered the stillness, a jagged sound that clawed at her nerves. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel, her heart slamming against her ribs as the flashing hues bathed her car's interior. In a disorienting dance of color, she stared straight ahead, willing her breath to steady, her mind racing to anchor itself in the calm she'd spent years perfecting. Derek shoved his door open and stepped onto the pavement, his boots striking the ground with a heavy, deliberate crunch. Each step toward her car echoed in the empty street, a slow march fueled by a need he couldn't fully name. The glare of his own lights framed him in shadow, his broad shoulders stiff with tension, his right hand hovering near the holster at his hip, not out of necessity, but out of habit, a silent assertion of power. He stopped at her window, his silhouette looming large, and rapped his knuckles against the glass. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice sharp and cold, stripped of any pretense of courtesy. "Mind telling me what you're doing in this neighborhood?" Renee turned to meet his gaze, her expression a fortress of calm despite the storm raging inside. "Good evening, officer," she replied, her tone steady, unshaken. "Is there a problem?" Derek's eyes flicked to her red cap, a brief flash of disdain curling his lip before he locked onto her face again. "That depends," he said, his words heavy with implication. "You don't exactly look like someone who belongs around here at this hour." The accusation hung between them, blunt and unapologetic, a verbal jab meant to provoke. Renee felt the sting, a familiar ache that pricked at old wounds. She'd heard variations of this script before too many times to let it rattle her now. Years of navigating these moments had forged an armor around her, one she wore with quiet pride. "I just left a meeting at the club down the street," she said evenly, her voice a smooth counterpoint to his aggression. "I'm heading home now." "Is there a specific reason you've stopped me?" Derek's jaw clenched, her confidence scraping against the fragile scaffolding of his authority. He didn't answer her question, cowled, "Really?" Instead, he snapped, "License and registration," his tone a whipcrack in the night. Renee kept her hands in plain sight, moving slowly as she reached for the glove compartment. She knew the rules, knew the unspoken dance of compliance that could mean the difference between escalation and escape. Her fingers closed around the documents, and she handed them over with a steady gaze. Refusing to break eye contact, Derek snatched the papers, his irritation mounting as he scanned them. Everything was pristine valid, registration current, no infractions to seize upon. The knot in his chest tightened, frustration coiling like a spring. "This is an affluent neighborhood," he said after a long pause, his voice thick with contempt. "You sure you're supposed to be here?" Her jaw tightened, a flicker of anger sparking beneath her calm exterior, but she forced it down. "As I said, officer, I just left a meeting. If there's nothing further, I'd like to be on my way." Her words were polite, measured, but they carried an edgy, a quiet challenge Derek couldn't ignore. His eyes hardened, his mind scrambling for a foothold, anything to justify the stop he'd already committed to. The air between them crackled, a collision of his unchecked bias and her unyielding resolve. "Step out of the vehicle," he barked suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Renee froze, her mind spinning. She knew her rights, knew this demand had no legal grounding, but she also knew the razor-thin line. She walked. Refusal could escalate this into something uglier, something she couldn't control. "May I ask why?" "Officer," she said carefully, testing the waters. Derek's face twisted, his patience fraying. "Don't question me," he shot back, his voice rising with a fury he barely contained. "Step out of the car. Now." The command was a loaded gun, its threat implicit and undeniable. Renee's heart thudded, but she unbuckled her seatbelt with deliberate slowness, her movements a silent protest as she opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. She stood tall, her height nearly matching his, her presence a quiet storm of strength. Derek's gaze bore into her, his body rigid with a tension he couldn't dispel. The cool night air did nothing to cool the heat radiating from him, a fire stoked by her refusal to bend. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice clipped and brittle. Renee hesitated, her breath steady despite the chaos threatening to engulf her. "Why?" she asked, her tone neutral but firm. "I've complied with everything you've asked, officer. Is there something specific I've done wrong?" His lips pressed into a thin line. Her question a spark to his smoldering temper. "I said turn around," he repeated, louder now, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. Renee held his stare for a heartbeat longer, then slowly turned, her hands still visible, her posture unbowed. Derek's hand twitched near his holster, not because she posed any danger, but because it anchored him, a crutch for the control he craved. He glanced back at his patrol car, the dashboard camera's red light blinking like an accusing eye. With a quick, furtive motion, he reached inside and switched it off. His decision made in the span of a breath. No one needed to witness this, no one needed to know. "You're awfully defensive for someone who claims they've done nothing wrong," he said, circling her slowly, his boots scuffing the pavement with predatory intent. Renee turned her head just enough to meet his gaze, her voice a low, steady hum. "And you're awfully aggressive for someone who has no reason to detain me." The words landed like a slap, precise and unflinching. Derek stiffened, his face darkening as her composure unraveled his fragile grip on the situation. "Watch your tone," he snapped, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing the space between them. "You don't get to talk to me like that." She faced him fully now, her chin lifting with quiet defiance. "I wasn't aware asking for clarity was disrespectful, officer. Perhaps you can explain why I was pulled over." Her question was a mirror, reflecting the emptiness of his actions back at him. He floundered, grasping for an answer he didn't have. "You're acting suspicious," he spat, the excuse hollow even as it left his lips. Renee's eyebrow arched, a subtle challenge. "Suspicious? Parking my car, walking to it? Or is it the color of my skin that's suspicious to you?" The accusation hit him like a punch, raw and unfiltered. His face flushed, anger surging as she stripped away his pretense. "You don't get to turn this into something it's not," he snarled, his voice rough with desperation. "People like you think you can waltz into neighborhoods like this and do whatever you want. Not on my watch." Renee's jaw clenched, but her eyes burned with a fire she refused to let him extinguish. "People like me," she echoed, her voice a quiet blade. "Care to elaborate, officer?" He didn't respond, not with words. Instead, he pivoted, yanking open her car door with a force that made the hinges groan. "You can't just search my vehicle," Renee said sharply, stepping toward him. Her calm fracturing for the first time. Derek's hand shot up, palm out, his posture a wall of rigid authority. "Stay back," he barked, his eyes wild with the need to reclaim control. "I can do what I need to ensure the safety of this neighborhood." But safety wasn't the issue, and they both knew it. This was about power, his to wield, hers to defy. What Derek couldn't have foreseen, as he rummaged through her car with reckless abandon, was the chain of events he'd just ignited. Renee's phone, tucked in her pocket, was already recording, her thumb discreetly pressing the button the moment he'd ordered her out. She stood there, a pillar of resilience, watching as he crossed a line that would unravel his career, his life, and the fragile illusion of justice he clung to. In the days that followed, the footage would spread like wildfire, a stark testament to the abuse of power that had festered in the shadows for too long. The community would rally, not just around Renee, but around the red cap that became a symbol, a beacon of resistance against a system riddled with cracks. Derek's downfall would be swift, his badge stripped away as the public reckoning exposed not just his prejudice, but the deeper flaws he'd been allowed to embody. For Renee, this wasn't just a personal victory, it was a clarion call, a lesson etched in the ashes of his career. Justice, when denied, has a way of rising louder than any siren, and the consequences of wielding power unjustly echo far beyond a single night. The night air hung heavy, thick with the scent of asphalt and tension. As Renee stood beside her car under the harsh glow of the streetlights, her voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and deliberate, each word a carefully aimed strike. "I know my rights," she declared, her tone steady and unyielding. "And unless you've got probable cause, What you're doing here is illegal." Her dark eyes glinted with defiance as she stared down the officer before her, a man whose fragile authority seemed to tremble beneath the weight of her resolve. Derek, clad in his crisp uniform, barely registered her words. His jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation sparking in his chest as he leaned forward, peering into the shadowed interior of her car. His eyes darted over the seats, the dashboard, the floor, searching, grasping for anything he could latch onto to justify this encounter. But there was nothing. No crumpled wrappers, no suspicious bags, not even a stray receipt to twist into evidence. Empty. He muttered under his breath, the word escaping like a hiss as he straightened up. His frustration coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap, and he stepped back, his boots scuffing against the pavement. Renee crossed her arms, her posture rigid yet composed, her gaze locked on him with an intensity that refused to waver. "Satisfied?" she asked, her voice edged with a quiet challenge. "Or are you planning to take this even further?" The question lingered in the air, daring him to reveal the depth of his intent. Derek turned sharply, his face a mask of barely concealed anger, the lines around his mouth deepening as he struggled to hold himself together. "You're real bold," he said, his voice low and clipped. "For someone who's this close to being arrested." He held up his hand, fingers pinched together to show the razor-thin margin he claimed separated her from handcuffs. "For what, exactly?" Renee fired back, her words quick and piercing. She took a small step forward, her sneakers silent against the pavement, her confidence unshaken. "For standing here asking questions? Or maybe because I'm not trembling at the sight of you." Derek's hand twitched near his belt, hovering close to the holstered weapon that seemed to whisper reassurance to him. In this moment of faltering control, "Don't push me," he warned, his voice dropping to a growl, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reassert his dominance. Renee didn't flinch. "I'm not pushing you, officer," she replied, her tone slicing through his bravado like a scalpel. "I'm holding you accountable. There's a differentiation you do well to learn." Her words struck a nerve, and Derek's nostrils flared as he closed the distance between them in a single, aggressive step. The space between them shrank to nothing, the heat of his breath mingling with the cool night air. "I don't need a lecture from you out here," he snapped, his voice rising. "I'm in charge. You do what I say, or there are consequences." Her eyes met his without hesitation, a storm of resolve brewing behind them. "Out here," she said evenly, "the law still applies. You're the one crossing lines, not me." For a moment, they stood frozen, locked in a silent battle of wills. The air crackled with unspoken fury, Derek's shaky authority clashing against Renee's unyielding strength. The street around them was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic, but in that narrow space, the tension was deafening. Derek broke the silence first, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. "You know what? Step to the back of the car." Renee's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "What for?" she asked, her tone sharp but measured. "You're resisting," he replied flatly, as if the word alone could justify everything. "Resisting what?" she countered, planting her feet firmly. "Standing my ground." His patience snapped like a brittle twig. "You're testing me," he barked. "Now move." Renee held her stance for a heartbeat longer, her mind racing as she weighed her options. She could feel the danger simmering beneath his words, the threat of escalation looming like a storm cloud. Finally, with deliberate slowness, she stepped back toward the trunk of her car, her movements precise and controlled. Derek followed close behind, his shadow stretching long and menacing under the streetlights. His hand brushed against the baton clipped to his belt, a subtle reminder of the power he wielded or thought he did. He gestured toward the bag resting on her trunk, a worn leather satchel that held her life's essentials. "What's in there?" he demanded, his tone dripping with accusation. Renee's response was immediate, her voice firm. "My personal belongings, and you're not entitled to go through them without cause." A cruel smirk twisted Derek's lips, his eyes glinting with malice. "Probable cause, lady. Your attitude's cause enough." He reached for the bag, his fingers curling around the strap, but Renee moved instinctively to block him, her body a shield between him and her property. "Don't touch that without a warrant," she said sharply, her voice rising with indignation. Her defiance pushed him past his breaking point. With a sudden, violent motion, Derek seized the bag and yanked it open, spilling its contents across the pavement in a chaotic cascade. Keys clattered against the ground, a phone skidded to a stop near the curb, and a folder slid out, its papers fluttering in the faint breeze like wounded birds. He snatched it up, flipping it open with a triumphant sneer, his eyes scanning the bold header, Internal Police Misconduct Review. Renee's stomach twisted, a cold knot of dread tightening within her, but her face remained an impenetrable mask of calm. "Confidential legal documents," she said, her voice steady despite the violation unfolding before her. "Put them back." Derek's smirk faltered as he skimmed the pages, the weight of what he held sinking in. He snapped the folder shut, his grip tightening until his knuckles whitened. "Well, isn't this interesting?" he said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "You're one of those crusaders, stirring up trouble where it doesn't belong." "Advocating for justice isn't trouble," she replied coolly, her words a quiet rebuke. "To me, it is." He shot back, tossing the folder onto the trunk with careless disdain. Renee's fists clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as frustration surged within her. "You're abusing your authority," she said, her voice low but resonant, each word heavy with conviction. Derek stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. "And you're pushing your luck," he taunted, his words a deliberate provocation. But Renee refused to take the bait. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, her gaze unwavering as she met his challenge head-on. "Officer Miles," she said calmly, her use of his name a quiet assertion of power. "I'm done entertaining this. Either charge me with something legitimate or let me leave." The sound of his name seemed to catch him off guard, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. For a brief moment, he hesitated, the consequences of his actions weighing on him like a shadow. But his pride, a brittle and unyielding thing, wouldn't let him retreat. "We're not done here," he said, the threat hanging heavy in the air. Renee stood her ground, her eyes locked on his as he loomed over her, the streetlights casting jagged shadows across the scene. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice sharper now, laced with impatience. Renee's expression remained steady, though the indignity of his command burned in her chest. "I've complied with everything you've asked, officer," she said, her voice tinged with quiet fury. "This is unnecessary." "Did I stutter?" Derek barked, closing the distance between them in a single stride. Before she could protest further, he grabbed her shoulder and spun her round with a roughness that made her wince. His hands shoved her forward until her palms pressed against the cold metal of the car's trunk, the sudden force sending a jolt through her body. "This is excessive, and you know it," she said, her voice unwavering despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Stay quiet," Derek snapped, his hands moving over her in a pat-down that was less a search and more an assertion of dominance. Every touch was invasive, every motion a deliberate overreach, as if he could bend her will through sheer force. When he finished, he stepped back, his chest heaving with exertion, and gestured toward the bag again. "What else are you hiding?" he demanded. Renee turned to face him, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "That bag contains personal belongings and confidential legal documents. If you touch it without probable cause, you're breaking the law." Derek ignored her, his movements fueled by spite as he snatched the bag once more and upended it onto the pavement. Her belongings spilled out in a chaotic sprawl, keys, a phone, and that same folder, its papers scattering further this time, caught by a gust of wind. "Stop this," Renee protested, stepping toward him, her voice rising with urgency. Derek held up a hand to block her, his growl low and menacing. "Back off." He bent down, grabbing the folder again, his eyes narrowing as he read the header once more, Internal Police Misconduct Review. His smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl that twisted his features into something ugly. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a troublemaker," he sneered, holding the papers up as if they were a trophy. "Put that down," Renee demanded, her voice firm and unyielding. "Those documents are protected under attorney-client privilege. You have no right to read them." Derek's eyes darted over the page, his grip tightening as the implications sank in. "This is what you're out here for," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "Digging up dirt on the department, People like you think you're above the law. Renee stepped closer, her presence commanding despite the chaos around her. People like me? She shot back, her tone fierce. You mean attorneys who fight against the abuse of power? Yes, that's exactly who I am. Her defiance ignited something in him, a spark of rage that flared in his eyes. You think you can talk your way out of this, Derek said, closing the gap until there was barely an inch between them. You're lucky I haven't arrested you yet. For what? Renee demanded, her voice rising with righteous indignation. For standing up to your baseless harassment. For knowing my rights. Derek's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into slits as his control slipped further. You want to play lawyer with me? Fine. Let's see how tough you are in cuffs. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back with a force that made her grimace. The cold bite of metal handcuffs followed, snapping into place with a sharp click that echoed in the stillness. This is unlawful, Renee exclaimed, her voice rising as she struggled against the restraints. You're abusing your authority, and you'll be held accountable. Derek yanked her other arm into place, locking the cuffs tighter, his breath hot against her ear as he hissed. You want to talk about abuse? You're the one out here stirring up trouble. Consider this a warning. Renee turned her head, her glare icy and unyielding despite the pain radiating from her wrists. This is no warning, she said, her voice low and cutting. This is intimidation. But you won't get away with it. Derek stepped back, a smirk curling his lips as he surveyed his handiwork. Keep running that mouth, he taunted. Let's see where it gets you. She straightened as much as the cuffs allowed, her voice calm but laced with steel. It'll get me to a courtroom, Officer Miles. And when it does, every word you've said, every move you've made, will be under a microscope. For a moment, Derek faltered, the fire in her eyes piercing through his bravado. But his pride, a stubborn and unrelenting force, refused to let him yield. We'll see about that, he said, dragging her toward the hood of the car. The cold metal pressed against her stomach as he shoved her forward, securing her in place. The sound of her scattered belongings crunching under his boots added a humiliating underscore to the moment, each crack and snap a reminder of his overreach. You can't justify this, Renee said, her voice steady despite the indignity. You're acting on bias, not law. I don't need a lecture from you, Derek shot back, pacing behind her like a caged animal, his frustration spilling over in erratic steps. Renee clenched her fists, the cuffs digging into her wrists as she fought to maintain her composure. You're proving my point with every second you hold me here, she said, her words a quiet condemnation. Derek spun toward her, his face flushed with anger, his chest heaving. And you're testing my patience, he growled. Your patience isn't the law, she retorted, the statement hanging in the air like a guillotine blade, sharp and final. His eyes flicked to the scattered documents, his breath ragged as he struggled to regain control. You think you're untouchable, he spat, leaning closer, his voice trembling with fury. You think your fancy job and big words make you better than me? I think knowing the law makes me smarter than someone who clearly doesn't, Renee replied, her voice steady and unflinching. The jab landed hard, and Derek's hand twitched toward his holster, the tension crackling like static in the air. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might cross an even darker line, but instead, he stepped back, his sneer returning like a mask slipping into place. You're under arrest, he announced, his voice dripping with false authority, for resisting an investigation. Renee's jaw tightened, but she refused to let fear creep into her expression. You'll regret this, she said simply, her words a promise carved in stone. We'll see about that, Derek replied, opening the door to his patrol car and shoving her toward the back seat. As he forced her inside, the night closed in around them, the streetlights casting long, accusing shadows over the scene. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Justice was a fragile thing, easily trampled by those who wielded power without restraint. Derek's actions, driven by ego and unchecked authority, were a stark reminder of the consequences that followed when the law was twisted to serve personal vendettas. And Renee, with her unwavering resolve, stood as a testament to the strength required to confront such abuse, a beacon of resistance against the darkness of corruption. The road ahead would be treacherous, but she knew the truth would eventually rise, and with it, the reckoning Derek so desperately deserved. The stillness of the night shattered as the low rumble of an approaching vehicle pierced through the heavy air, its sound slicing into the tension that hung between Renee and Derek like a taut wire ready to snap. Both of them turned instinctively, their eyes narrowing as twin beams of light carved through the darkness, growing sharper and more intense with every passing second. The headlights illuminated the cracked asphalt of the empty parking lot, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the ground as the car drew nearer. For Renee, a faint spark of hope flickered deep within her chest. Reinforcements, perhaps, a lifeline in this spiraling nightmare. But the twist in her gut told her Derek's expectations were far different, and the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth only confirmed it. Without a word, Derek's hand shot out, rough and unyielding, shoving Renee toward the back of his patrol car. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, the sharp edges grinding against her skin as she stumbled forward, her sneakers scuffing against the pavement. Pain flared briefly, but she caught herself, her balance returning in a defiant surge. She whipped her head around to face him, her dark hair falling across her eyes, her breath ragged but steady. "This is illegal," she shouted, her voice ringing out into the quiet street, sharp and fearless, cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade. "You're breaking the law, and you damn well know it." Her words were a challenge, a spark thrown into dry grass, but Derek didn't even flinch. His face remained a stony mask, though his shoulders twitched with barely contained irritation as he stormed back toward her car, his movements jerky and forceful, like a man teetering on the edge of control. "Stay where you are," he barked over his shoulder, his voice harsh and commanding, dripping with the arrogance of unchecked power. He yanked the driver's side door open again, the hinges groaning under the force, as if the car itself resented his intrusion. Renee's chest heaved with indignation, her pulse pounding in her ears. "You've already searched my car," she called out, her tone loud and unyielding, refusing to let him drown her out. "What do you think you're going to find now? Or is this just some pathetic attempt to prove a point you can't even justify?" Her words hit him like a slap, and she saw it in the way his hand tightened around the edge of the door, his knuckles whitening under the strain. He ignored her, leaning into the vehicle with a grunt, his broad frame blocking the interior from her view as he rummaged through the glove compartment. Papers spilled out, fluttering to the floor in a chaotic cascade. Sipes, a parking stub, an old insurance card, but nothing incriminating emerged. The emptiness of his search only deepened the scowl etched across his face, his frustration bubbling over into something darker. "You have no warrant," Renee yelled, her voice rising with a fierce, righteous defiance that echoed off the surrounding buildings. "This is an abuse of power, and you're not even pretending it's anything else." Derek straightened abruptly, slamming the car door shut with a force that reverberated through the lot, a loud bang that seemed to punctuate his unraveling composure. He whirled on her, his finger jabbing the air accusingly. "I don't need a warrant," he snapped, his tone venomous, his eyes glinting with a dangerous edge. "You've been uncooperative from the start." Renee's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through his excuse like glass. "Cooperative," she shot back, stepping forward as far as the cuffs would allow, her chin raised in challenge. "For asking you to explain yourself, that's not resistance. Officer Milestat's called accountability, something you clearly don't understand." Her words struck a nerve, igniting a fire in Derek's gaze. He strode to the trunk of her car, his boots thudding heavily against the pavement, and wrenched it open with a reckless tug. His hands moved carelessly, knocking over a pair of neatly folded running shoes that tumbled out onto the ground, followed by a sleek black briefcase. He seized it, snapping the latches open with a loud click, revealing her laptop nestled among a stack of legal documents, case files, notes, her life's work laid bare. "Stop it," Renee shouted, her voice cracking with a mix of fury and desperation as she strained against the cuffs. "You're crossing the line." Her cry pierced the night, raw and urgent, and it didn't go unnoticed. From the shadows near the edge of the lot, a figure emerged, a man, unassuming but resolute, his phone already raised, its screen glowing faintly as he began to record. "Hey," the stranger called out, his voice steady but tinged with unease, cutting through the escalating chaos. "What's going on here?" Derek froze for a split second, his head snapping toward the man, his jaw clenching so tightly it looked like it might crack. He straightened, his tone sharp and biting as he addressed the intruder. "This is a police matter. Step back." The man didn't waver, his grip on the phone firm, though his eyes flicked nervously between Derek and Renee. "I'm just filming," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "She's not resisting. You're out of line, officer." Derek's eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind them as he took a menacing step toward the man. "I said step back and turn that off. Now." The stranger held his ground, his phone unwavering, a quiet courage steadying his stance. "I don't have to," he said firmly, his words carrying the weight of conviction. "This is public property, and I have every right to record." Renee seized the moment, her voice rising even louder, fueled by a surge of gratitude and determination. "Thank you. Please, keep recording. This officer has no grounds for what he's doing, searching my car illegally and detaining me without cause." Derek's frustration erupted, a growl rumbling in his throat as he stormed toward the man, his hand hovering over the baton at his belt. "I won't tell you again," he snarled, his voice low and threatening. "Shut that off, or I'll confiscate it." The man took a cautious step back but kept filming, his resolve unshaken. "You touch me, and I'll make sure this video goes straight to your precinct in the media." Derek's hand twitched, hesitating just short of drawing the baton, his chest heaving with barely restrained rage. He spun back toward Renee, his face a twisted mask of fury. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" he spat, his words dripping with contempt. Renee met his glare head-on, unflinching, her voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline coursing through her. "Enjoying what?" "Watching you dig your own grave. You're making my case for me, officer." He stepped closer, looming over her, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you're so clever, but all that talk won't mean a damn thing when you're booked downtown." Renee's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening like steel. "That's your problem, Derek. You think intimidation can replace accountability. It can't." Before he could respond, the roar of another engine sliced through the night, the sound sharp and commanding, pulling their attention toward the street. Headlights flared, bright and unyielding, as a sleek black SUV rolled into view, its tires crunching against the gravel as it came to a stop a few yards away. The driver's door swung open, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out. Marcus Walker, Renee's husband. His presence hit the scene like a thunderclap. Marcus strode forward with deliberate steps, his military-honed frame cutting an intimidating silhouette against the dim streetlights. His squared shoulders and steady gait spoke of discipline and strength, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked on the tableau before him. Derek muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible, "Who's this?" His eyes narrowed as Marcus approached, suspicion tightening his grip on his authority. "Let me guess," Marcus said, his deep voice rolling through the tension like a wave. Calm but edged with steel. "Officer Miles." Derek's posture stiffened, his arms crossing defensively. "This is a police matter. I suggest you stay out of it." Marcus stopped just short of him, his gaze dropping to the handcuffs binding Renee's wrists, then flicking back to Derek with a cold, measured intensity. "That's my wife you've got in cuffs," he said, his tone low and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of a warning. "So no, I won't be staying out of it." Derek scrambled for a defense, his words tumbling out too quickly. She was resisting. Marcus's brow arched slightly, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Resisting what, exactly?" he asked, his voice piercingly direct. "Answer carefully, officer." Derek faltered, his bravado crumbling under the scrutiny. "Suspicious activity," he said finally, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. Marcus tilted his head, his expression skeptical. "Suspicious activity? Walking to her car, carrying legal documents? Or does suspicious just mean existing while black in your book?" Renee watched as Derek's face flushed a deep red, his fists clenching at his sides, his control slipping further with every pointed question. The stranger with the phone shifted slightly, the faint whir of his recording a constant reminder of the growing audience to Derek's unraveling. "I'm following protocol," Derek insisted, his voice cracking under the strain. But Marcus cut him off with a cool, unyielding response. "Protocol doesn't include illegal searches or baseless arrests." So I suggest you release her and start explaining yourself before this goes any further." Derek's pride flared, a last desperate stand. "You don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped, his voice rising. Marcus didn't blink, his tone firm and unshakable. "No, but I will tell you when you're doing it wrong," the stranger chimed in, his voice cutting through the standoff. "He's right. This is harassment, plain and simple." The weight of their combined defiance pressed down on Derek, his eyes darting between Marcus, Renee, and the man with the phone. For the first time, the cracks in his authority were glaringly visible, his confidence eroding under the spotlight of justice. Renee straightened, her voice slicing through the silence with unwavering clarity. "This ends now. Officer Miles, you either admit your mistake or you face the consequences." Derek's jaw tightened, his silence a grudging admission of defeat, though his pride wouldn't let him yield. Marcus took another step closer, his presence towering, his voice dropping to a low, commanding rumble. "Make your choice, officer. But know this, whatever you decide, we won't back down." The air crackled with tension, the faint sound of the stranger's camera still rolling in the background, capturing every moment of this clash between power and righteousness. Derek stood alone, his authority crumbling, a stark reminder that justice, when provoked, demands its due, and the abuse of power carries a cost that no badge can shield. The night air was thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on the dimly lit parking lot where Marcus stood, his posture unyielding, his dark eyes locked on Derek with a quiet intensity that belied the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. "I'm not here to scare you," Marcus said, his voice steady as granite, each word deliberate, cutting through the charged silence. "I'm here to hold you accountable." His tone carried no malice, only the resolute certainty of a man who had faced worse threats than this and emerged unbroken. Derek, bristling with indignation, took a bold step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. His chest puffed out as his voice climbed, sharp and jagged like a blade scraping metal. "You think you can just stroll in here, throw your weight around, and undermine my authority? You've got no idea who you're messing with." His lips curled into a sneer, his eyes narrowing as if daring Marcus to push him further. Inside, though, a flicker of unease danced. Marcus's unshakable composure gnawed at him, a splinter under his skin he couldn't ignore. Marcus didn't flinch. His response came low and even, but there was a razor's edge to it, honed by years of facing down men who mistook arrogance for strength. "I've dealt with men more dangerous than you, Derek. Men more full of themselves, too. The difference, they had enough sense to know when they'd crossed a line." His gaze never wavered, pinning Derek in place, stripping away the bravado layer by layer. For Marcus, this wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning, a stand against the kind of unchecked power that festered when left unchallenged. Derek's face twisted, his sneer deepening into something uglier, a mask of contempt barely concealing the frustration boiling inside him. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Strutting around in that uniform, acting like you own this place." His voice dripped with venom, his hands twitching at his sides as if itching to lash out. The uniform Marcus wore, a crisp symbol of discipline and honor, only fueled Derek's resentment, a glaring reminder of everything he lacked. "I'm not acting," Marcus replied, his bluntness landing like a hammer on glass. "I've earned the respect that comes with this uniform, something you clearly haven't figured out yet." His words were a quiet thunderclap, reverberating through the tense air, and Derek felt them hit like a physical blow. His hand, which had been hovering near his holster, dropped abruptly, fingers curling into tight fists. His entire body vibrated with barely contained rage, his pride wounded, his authority crumbling beneath the weight of Marcus's unwavering resolve. Before Derek could muster a retort, the low growl of engines cut through the standoff, tires rolling over asphalt as two police cruisers pulled into the lot. Their flashing lights painted the scene in erratic bursts of red and blue, casting long, shifting shadows across the pavement. Backup had arrived, and with it, a fleeting spark of confidence flickered back into Derek's eyes. Finally, he muttered under his breath, straightening his posture as he turned toward the approaching officers, certain this would tip the scales in his favor. For figures emerged from the vehicles, their silhouettes sharp against the pulsing lights. Leading them was Sergeant Paul Carter, A man in his late 40s, whose weathered face and stern demeanor spoke of years spent navigating chaos with unflinching resolve. His sharp hazel eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail of overturned briefcase, spilling papers across the ground. Renee standing with quiet defiance, Marcus's commanding presence, and Derek's coiled aggression. "What's going on here?" Carter's voice boomed, firm and unyielding, demanding answers with the weight of authority earned through experience. Derek jumped in, eager to seize control of the narrative. "This individual," he said, jabbing a finger toward Marcus, "is interfering with my investigation." His words tumbled out in a rush, his tone clipped and defensive. Marcus stepped forward, cutting him off with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm General Marcus Walker," he said, his voice ringing clear and steady. "And that's my wife you've unlawfully detained." He gestured toward Renee, who stood with her chin lifted, her wrists still bearing the faint red marks of the cuffs. "Your officer here has violated multiple protocol illegal searches, escalating this without cause. He's out of line." Carter's gaze shifted to Derek, his expression tightening into a mask of scrutiny. "Is that true?" he asked, his tone low but piercing, leaving no room for evasion. Derek faltered, his confidence cracking like thin ice. "To add probable cause," he stammered, grasping for justification. "She was acting suspicious." Marcus's voice cut in again, sharp and unrelenting. "Suspicious how? Walking to her car with legal documents? Or does suspicious just mean she doesn't fit your idea of who belongs in this neighborhood?" The accusation hung heavy in the air, its implications sinking into Carter like a stone. His eyes narrowed, the weight of bias laid bare before him. Derek's excuse unraveled further as Renee spoke up, her voice slicing through the tension like a whip. "That's a lie," she said, her words edged with fury she'd held back too long. He turned off his dash cam deliberately. "He's been trying to intimidate me from the start." Her dark eyes burned with a mix of anger and exhaustion, her body rigid as she fought to keep her composure. The other officers, 3 men standing just behind Carter, exchanged uneasy glances, their hands resting on their belts, the gravity of her words settling over them like a storm cloud. Carter's jaw clenched, his patience fraying as he turned back to Derek. "You turned off your dash cam." Derek's defiance flared, his voice rising in a desperate bid to reclaim control. "It malfunctioned," he said weakly, but the lie was flimsy, a threadbare shield against the mounting evidence. "This is my scene," he snapped, his frustration boiling over as he jabbed a finger toward Carter. "I don't need you or anyone else questioning how I handle it." Carter's response was ice cold, his authority absolute. "It stopped being your scene the moment you violated procedure. Hand over the keys to her cuffs." Now, Derek froze, his pride warring with the reality closing in around him. For a long moment, he stood there, chest heaving, his sneer twisting into something brittle and desperate. Finally, with a grudging flick of his wrist, he pulled the keys from his belt and unlocked the cuffs around Renee's wrists. She winced as they fell away, rubbing the tender skin. Her gaze locked on Derek with a quiet intensity that promised this wasn't the end. "This isn't over," she said softly, her voice a vow wrapped in steel. Marcus stepped beside her, his presence a solid anchor in the chaos, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting gesture of reassurance. "You're right," he said, his eyes never leaving Derek. "It's just beginning." The words carried a weight that made Derek's fists clench tighter, his face a storm of anger and humiliation as he stood exposed. Under the glare of the flashing lights, Carter motioned to one of the officers, a weary young man named Hayes, whose nervous energy betrayed his inexperience. "Sato, gather Renee's scattered documents from the ground." Hayes moved quickly, his hands trembling slightly as he scooped up the papers, glancing between Marcus and Derek as if unsure where the greater threat lay. "General Walker," Carter said, turning to Marcus with a nod. "I'll make sure this is handled appropriately." His tone was clipped, professional, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes, an acknowledgement of Marcus's rank and resolve. "You'd better," Marcus replied, his voice firm but measured, "because if you don't, this will go higher than either of us can reach." The warning lingered, a promise of consequences that stretched beyond this parking lot, a reminder that justice wasn't just a word, it was a force, one Marcus wielded with precision. Derek stood rooted to the spot, his fists balled so tight his knuckles whitened, his face a twisted mask of rage and shame. A man with a phonesome bystander who'd been filming the entire exchange drifted closer, capturing every flinch, every word. Carter turned to Derek one last time, his voice a final gavel strike. "You're relieved of duty for the night. Report to my office in the morning." The other officers stepped forward to escort Derek to his patrol car, but he yanked his arm free, his glare burning into Marcus with a hatred that simmered just below the surface. "You think this is over?" Derek snarled, his voice raw with defiance. Marcus didn't blink, his calm unshaken. "For you, it might be." The words were a quiet prophecy, a warning of the fallout that awaited when power was abused and justice came calling. The tension thickened as Derek stormed toward his cruiser, his boots pounding the pavement in a rhythm of barely contained fury. Behind him, Officer Hayes lingered, his youthful face creased with uncertainty. He'd seen enough to know something was wrong, but his loyalty to Derek, a man he'd ridden alongside for months, warred with the nagging doubt, now taking root. "Sergeant," Hayes ventured, his voice hesitant, "I got here late, but this doesn't add up. There's no evidence she did anything." Derek whipped around, his frustration erupting. "You don't know what you're talking about, Hayes. She was refusing to cooperate." Renee's voice cut through his outburst, sharp and unflinching. "Refusing to cooperate, or refusing to let you trample my rights." Her words were a challenge, her stance unwavering as she faced the man who'd tried to break her spirit. Carter raised a hand, his patience threadbare. "Miles, calm down. Let's get this straight." Derek's voice rose again, shrill with desperation. She wouldn't follow instructions. She was belligerent, questioning everything. People like her. Marcus stepped forward, his voice a blade slicing through the rant. "What do you mean, people like her?" "Because it sounds like bias, not protocol, driving this." Derek turned on Marcus, his face flushed with rage. "You don't know what it's like out here. You think your rank means anything in the real world? You're just another enough." Carter barked, stepping between them, his voice a thunderclap that silenced even the crickets chirping in the distance. "Miles, step back." Now, Derek obeyed, but his eyes stayed locked on Marcus, his jaw tight with a fury he could barely contain. Carter turned to Marcus, his tone softening slightly. "I apologize for this. Let me handle it." Marcus nodded, but his reply was unwavering. "I expect you to. But if this gets buried, I'll make sure it's addressed at a level you can't ignore. Believe me, I have the means." Carter gave a curt nod, then turned to Derek. "Turn on your body cam." Derek stiffened, his excuse feeble. "It malfunctioned." Renee crossed her arms, her voice dry. "Convenient." Carter motioned to Hayes. "Check his dash cam." Derek stepped in front of the car, his voice rising in panic. "That's not necessary." But Carter's patience was gone. "If there's nothing to hide, let us confirm it." Derek's silence was deafening, his hesitation a confession louder than words. Carter's face darkened as the truth crystallized. "You turned it off, didn't you?" Derek's defiance crumbled into defensiveness. "I didn't think it was needed." "She wasn't cooperating." Carter cut him off, his voice a whip. "You've said that enough, and nothing I'm seeing backs it up." Derek's frustration exploded. "Are you really going to side with them? I've been on this job for years, dealing with punks and criminals, and this is the thanks I get. I'm siding with the law." Carter shot back, his words a wall Derek couldn't breach. "And you've forgotten what that means." The lesson hung heavy in the air. Justice wasn't a tool to wield for personal gain, and the consequences of abusing it were swift and unforgiving. As Derek was led away, the parking lot grew quiet, but the echoes of the night lingered, a stark reminder that power unchecked was a fragile thing, destined to shatter under the weight of its own excess. The air in the parking lot hung heavy, thick with unspoken threats and the sharp tang of adrenaline. Sergeant Carter's voice sliced through the tension like a blade, cold and unyielding, as he snapped at Officer Derek. "Miles, don't you dare finish that sentence. Miles, you're teetering on the edge of a cliff, and you don't even see it." His words carried a weight that made the other officers shift uncomfortably, their boots scuffing against the cracked asphalt. Derek's hand jerked instinctively toward his belt, fingers brushing the empty space where his holster usually rested, a reflex born of habit and defiance. But before he could escalate the brewing storm, Carter stepped forward, his broad frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Derek whole. "You're spiraling out of control," Carter said, his tone icy, his dark eyes locked on Derek's. "And I'll be damned if I let you drag this entire department into the abyss with you." The atmosphere crackled, as if a single spark could set off an explosion. Every muscle in Derek's body tensed, his chest heaving with barely contained fury, while the other officers stood frozen, their breaths shallow, waiting for the inevitable clash. From the corner of the lot, Officer Hayes emerged from a patrol car, his footsteps deliberate as he clutched the dashcam unit in his hands. His face was etched with unease as he held it up for Carter to see. "Sergeant," he said, his voice tight, "this thing's been switched off manually." Carter's jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter, a flicker of betrayal flashing in his eyes. He turned back to Derek, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "You're finished, Miles. Hand over your badge and your weapon, now." Derek stood rooted to the spot, his wide eyes darting between Carter and the gathered officers, disbelief warring with the rage simmering beneath his skin. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and indignation. Carter didn't flinch, his stance unwavering, his hand outstretched expectantly. "Do it," he commanded, the finality in his tone leaving no room for argument. For a long moment, Derek didn't move, the reality of his downfall sinking in like a stone through water. His fingers shook as he reached for his badge, the metal glinting faintly under the dim streetlights as he unclipped it from his uniform. His holster followed, the leather creaking as he relinquished it, each movement a surrender that burned in his chest like acid. "This isn't over," he growled, his voice low and dripping with venom, a promise of retribution lingering in the air. Carter didn't respond immediately, his gaze steady and unreadable. Instead, he nodded to Officer Hayes, who stepped forward with a quiet authority. "Escort him to his car," Carter said, his tone clipped. "He's relieved of duty, effective immediately," as Hayes took Derek by the arm, guiding him away from the scene. The suffocating tension that had gripped the group began to dissipate. Like a storm cloud drifting off into the distance, the remaining officers exhaled collectively, their shoulders loosening, though their eyes still followed Derek's retreating figure with wary caution. Carter turned to face Renee and Marcus Walker, who stood side by side, their presence commanding despite the chaos that had just unfolded. Renee's posture was rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her sharp gaze cutting through the night. Marcus, a retired general whose very name carried the weight of authority, stood with a quiet strength, his hands clasped behind his back. "General Walker, Mrs. Walker," Carter began, his voice softening slightly but retaining its professional edge. "I'll make sure this incident is thoroughly investigated. You have my word on that." Marcus tilted his head, his expression calm but piercing. "I'll hold you to it, Sergeant," he replied, his deep voice resonating with a subtle challenge. Renee's lips parted, her tone firm and unyielding as she added, "Good. Because this isn't just about one rogue officer. It's about the system that props up people like him, that lets them think they're above the law." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth, and Carter nodded slowly, her point striking a chord deep within him. "Understood," he said, his voice quieter now, as if he were grappling with the enormity of what she'd implied. Meanwhile, Derek stood motionless a few feet away, the absence of his badge and holster leaving him feeling stripped bare, vulnerable in a way he hadn't anticipated. The humiliation of being publicly dismantled in front of his peers gnawed at him, a bitter fire spreading through his veins. But it was Marcus Walker's towering presence that fueled his rage the most. Clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white, Derek's breaths came in short, ragged bursts, his mind racing with resentment. Carter turned back to address Marcus and Renee, his attention shifting to the next steps. But Derek couldn't hold his tongue. "You think you've won," he muttered, his voice a low hiss, venom seeping into every syllable. Renee straightened, her eyes locking onto Derek's with an intensity that made him falter for a split second. Her face remained unreadable, a mask of calm that belied the storm of emotions churning beneath. "This isn't a game to be won or lost, officer," she said, her voice steady and deliberate. It's about accountability. That single word accountability's what little restraint Derek had left. It was a mirror held up to his actions, reflecting every misstep, every abuse of power. And he couldn't bear the sight of it. With a guttural roar, he lunged forward, his face contorted with raw, unbridled anger, his hands aiming for Marcus's chest. "You don't get to stand there and judge me," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the empty lot. A desperate cry of a man unraveling. The move was reckless, a wildfire blazing out of control, and it caught everyone off guard. The officers flinched, their hands instinctively hovering near their weapons. But before Derek could close the distance, Hayes sprang into action. With a swift, practiced motion, he seized Derek's arm, yanking him back with a grip like iron. "Derek, stop," Hayes barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "You're crossing a line you can't come back from." Derek thrashed against the hold, his frustration boiling over into wild, erratic movements. "Get your damn hands off me," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of his fury, his body trembling with the effort to break free. Carter stepped forward, his face now a storm of anger and resolve. "Miles, stand down," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. But Derek's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, his rage blinding him to reason. "You think you're better than me," he spat, his words dripping with contempt. "You waltz in here acting like you own the place." Marcus didn't flinch, though his stance shifted subtly, his body poised to react if necessary. "You're out of control, officer," he said evenly, his voice a calm anchor in the tempest. "This isn't about me. It's about you and your failure to wield the power you were given with any shred of decency." Renee took a step forward, her presence radiating strength as she addressed Carter directly. "Sergeant, this has gone far enough," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "He's a danger to everyone here. Get him out of sight." Carter nodded sharply, his patience worn thin. "Hayes, remove him." Now, Hayes tightened his grip, dragging Derek back a few steps as the disgraced officer continued to resist. "That's enough." "Derek," Hayes said, his tone firm but tinged with a trace of pity. "Don't make this worse than it already is." Derek's face flushed a deep crimson, his eyes darting wildly between Marcus, Renee, and Carter, searching for an ally and finding none. "You're all against me," he snarled, his voice breaking with desperation. "You're letting them call the shots and throwing me to the wolves." Carter's expression hardened, his patience replaced by cold resolve. "No one's throwing you anywhere, Miles. You've built this mess all on your own. And if you don't stop right now, I'll ensure this moment haunts your career until the day you retire." Derek's gaze flickered, a chaotic blend of defiance and despair swirling in his eyes. His breathing was ragged, his body trembling as he fought to hold on to the last scraps of his pride. Then, out of instinct or sheer desperation, his hand twitched toward his belt again, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Hayes reacted instantly, his voice a low growl. "Don't even think about it, Derek." The tension in the lot spiked to a suffocating peak, every officer on edge, their hands poised near their holsters, ready to intervene if Derek pushed further. Carter's voice rang out, final and unyielding. "You're done here, Miles. Turn around and walk away, or I'll have you in cuffs before the night's over." Derek glared at him, his lips curling into a sneer, his pride warring with the reality crashing down around him. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're all making a mistake." Carter didn't waver. "The only mistake was letting you slide for so long." With a shaky step backward, Derek's bravado began to crumble, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his situation settled in. The officers around him relaxed slightly, though their vigilance didn't waver, their hands still hovering near their weapons. Hayes guided Derek toward the patrol car, his grip steady but not cruel. "Let it go, Miles," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "It's over." Derek resisted for a heartbeat longer, his pride anchoring him to the spot. But then, with a sharp, defeated exhale, he relented, allowing himself to be led away. As Derek was escorted to the car, Renee turned to Carter, her tone unwavering despite the exhaustion creeping into her frame. "This could have ended so much worse," she said, her eyes searching his. "If he can't keep himself in check here, how can you trust him to handle anything out there?" Carter's expression darkened, a grim acknowledgement of her words settling over him. "You're right, Mrs. Walker. I'll make sure this is dealt with," Marcus interjected, his voice firm. "Not just dealt with, fixed. Because if it isn't, this won't be the last time someone like him abuses their badge." Carter met his gaze, the gravity of the statement sinking deep. "Understood," he replied, the word heavy with intent. Derek was shoved into the back of the patrol car, his face a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. As the door slammed shut, his eyes caught sight of a bystander across the lot, a man holding a phone steady, recording every second of the ordeal. The sight reignited Derek's fury, and he pounded a fist against the window. "You're gonna regret that," he shouted, his voice muffled but venomous. "You don't know what you're messing with." The man didn't flinch, his expression calm and resolute. "What I know," he said, his voice steady, "is that the world needs to see this." Derek let out a bitter, hollow laugh, slumping back against the seat as the car pulled away, the growl of its engine fading into the night. The parking lot settled into an uneasy quiet, the buzz of residual tension lingering like static in the air. Carter turned back to Marcus and Renee, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to shake off the weight of the night. "I'll file a full report," he said, his tone apologetic but resolute. "And I'll personally ensure Miles is held accountable." Renee's gaze sharpened, her arms still crossed. "That's the bare minimum, Sergeant," she replied. Marcus nodded, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "It's a start," he added, his voice a quiet promise of vigilance. As the remaining officers began to disperse, Marcus squeezed Renee's shoulder gently. "You okay?" he asked, his tone soft but laced with concern. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool night air, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. "I will be. But this isn't over." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes scanning the now empty lot. "No," he agreed, "it's just the beginning." The lesson was clear. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed from above, it was a demand, a fight, a reckoning. And the consequences of power unchecked were a wound that festered until someone dared to cut it out. The air in the dimly lit parking lot hung heavy with tension, thick enough to choke on. As Carter stood there, his jaw clenching so tight it seemed his teeth might crack under the strain, her words sharp, unrelenting, pierced through the fog of his exhaustion, each syllable a reminder of the mess he was tangled in. "Your department can't keep policing itself," she'd said, her voice steady, but laced with a fury that simmered just beneath the surface. Carter's chest tightened as he processed the accusation, feeling the weight of it settle into his bones. After a long, agonizing pause, he forced the words out, his tone low and gravelly. "I don't disagree with you." He shifted his stance, boots scuffing against the cracked asphalt, his broad shoulders slumping slightly under the burden of a truth he couldn't dodge. "But I don't write the rules, just enforce what's already there." Marcus, standing a few feet away, wasn't about to let that slide. His eyes narrowed, glinting with a mix of frustration and defiance under the flickering streetlights. "Enforcing what's already there is exactly why we're standing here right now," he shot back, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. He gestured toward the scene they'd all just witnessed. Edificer Derek Miles, smug and unrepentant, spinning excuses that fell apart the moment they left his mouth. "You saw what he did tonight. You heard the garbage he tried to pass off as justification. If we hadn't been here, if we hadn't seen it with our own eyes so many more times, would he have walked away clean?" Marcus's hands balled into fists at his sides, his knuckles whitening as he fought to keep his anger in check. The image of Miles's smirk burned in his mind, a taunting reminder of a system that shielded men like him. Carter let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a decade on the force. His weathered face creased deeper as he rubbed a hand across his jaw, torn between the loyalty he felt to his badge and the gnawing realization that Marcus was right. "I can't overhaul the whole damn system," he said, his voice rough with fatigue and something close to despair. "But I can tell you this, Miles isn't getting off easy tonight. There'll be consequence, I'll make sure of it. And I'll push this department to cooperate with any outside investigation that comes our way." His eyes darted between Marcus and Renee, searching for some sign that his promise might be enough to ease the storm brewing around him. Renee's lips tightened, her sharp gaze boring into him like a drill. "That's a start, Sergeant." she said, her words clipped and edged with a bitterness she didn't bother to hide. But it's nowhere near enough. She crossed her arms, her posture rigid, every inch of her radiating a resolve that could have cracked stone. Carter hesitated, feeling the heat of her stare, then met her eyes with a steadiness he hoped conveyed more than his words could. "What do you want from me, then?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "For starters," Renee replied, her tone rising with a fierce clarity, "I want this department to own up to what happened here tonight publicly. No burying it in some internal report no one will ever see. No pretending it's not as bad as it is. The people out there," she waved a hand toward the quiet streets beyond the lot, where the city slept unaware, "they deserve to know exactly what kind of behavior their police force is letting slide." Her eyes flashed with a fire born from years of battling injustices she couldn't unsee, her breath catching slightly as she imagined the faces of those who'd never gotten their chance to be heard. Carter's gaze flicked to the side, landing on a man lingering near the edge of the senior civilian. Phone still in hand, the faint red light of the recording dot glowing like a beacon in the dark. The guy hadn't said a word, just kept filming, capturing every second of their exchange. Carter's stomach twisted as the reality sank in. "That video's going online no matter what I do," he admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "This isn't staying quiet." "Good," Marcus said, his bluntness cutting through the tension like a hammer on glass. "Because staying silent makes us just as guilty." His broad frame shifted as he stepped closer to Renee, his presence a silent show of solidarity. Carter's lips pressed into a thin, strained line, the weight of their words pressing down on him like a physical force. "You're both right," he conceded, his tone quieter now, almost reluctant. "But when this blows up and it wouldn't think the spotlight's only going to shine on us. It'll hit you too, and not everyone's going to clap for you." Renee's expression hardened, her jaw setting with a defiance that seemed to radiate from her core. "I'm not afraid of a little attention, Sergeant," she said, her voice steady and cold. "I've spent my whole career fighting for people who don't have a voice. If that means taking some heat, I'll stand in the fire and smile while I do it." Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding, daring him to doubt her resolve. Carter studied her for a moment, the faintest flicker of admiration crossing his face before he gave a small, respectful nod. "I'll file my report tonight," he said, straightening up. "I'll push for immediate discipline more than just a slap on the wrist. You have my word." Marcus tilted his head, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "I'm holding you to that, Carter," he said, his deep voice carrying a promise of its own. Carter extended his hand toward Renee again, his calloused fingers trembling slightly from the weight of the night. "I'm sorry this happened," he said, sincerity threading through his words. "I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't happen again." But Renee didn't move to take his hand. Instead, she held his gaze, her eyes searching his for something deeper than apologies. "This isn't about you trying your best, Sergeant," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "It's about whether you're willing to stand up to a system that's rotten at its core. If you can't promise me that, your words don't mean a damn thing." Carter's hand dropped slowly to his side, the rejection stinging more than he'd expected. He gave a single, solemn nod, understood, before stepping back to bark orders at the officers milling around the lot, their flashlights casting erratic beams across the pavement. Marcus turned to Renee as the chaos began to settle, his voice dropping to a hushed, urgent tone. "What's our next move?" Renee exhaled sharply, her breath fogging in the cool night air as she glanced at the scattered remnants of her belongings, an overturned bag, a cracked phone screen still being collected by a young officer who avoided her gaze. "We take this public," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion creeping into her bones. "This can't stay locked up in one precinct. People need to see how deep this poison runs." Marcus cocked his head, studying her with a mix of concern and admiration. "You sure about this?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Renee nodded, her resolve hardening like steel. "I've spent years fighting these battles in courtrooms, Marcus. It's time to drag this fight into the open. The public deserves the truth of every ugly piece of it." As the last of the patrol cars rumbled out of the lot, their taillights fading into the night, Carter approached one final time. His shoulders were stiff, his face etched with a tension he couldn't shake. "If you need records, reports think my office directly," he said, his voice quieter now, almost personal. "I'll make sure you get it." Renee gave a curt nod, her expression unreadable. "I'll be in touch." Carter lingered for a heartbeat, then turned and rejoined his team, his boots echoing against the asphalt. Marcus rested a steady hand on Renee's shoulder, his touch grounding her as the silence settled in, broken only by the hum of the streetlights overhead. "This isn't going to be easy," he said softly, his dark eyes searching hers. "Nothing worth fighting for ever is," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. They stood there together, watching the empty lot stretch out before them, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down like a gathering thunderhead. Days later, Renee sat at the long oak table in her cramped office, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and determination. Stacks of documents towered around her, each page a weapon in the war she was waging against the precinct and against Officer Derek Miles, whose smug face haunted her every thought. Her laptop glowed in the dim light, its screen cluttered with drafts of complaints, legal filings, and press statements she'd been crafting late into the night. Across from her, Marcus hunched over his phone, scrolling through the flood of public reactions to the video that had exploded online. "I've finalized the complaint," Renee said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning in her chest. Fear, hope, all tangled together. "It's airtight, detailed enough that they can't dismiss it without a fight. If they think they can sweep this under the rug, they're in for a hell of a surprise." Marcus leaned forward, his broad hands resting on the table, his expression a blend of pride and steely resolve. "How are you framing this for the public?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling with purpose. "This isn't just about Millis, it's about tearing the mask off the system that let him run wild." Renee nodded, her fingers tightening around the pen she'd been clutching. "Exactly. This isn't about one bad cop, it's about the policies, the culture, the whole damn machine that propped him up. I'm reaching out to civil rights groups to amplify that. We need voices louder than ours to make sure this doesn't get buried." Marcus set his phone down, the screen still glowing with comments and retweets. "I've got contacts in the media, people I trust. When this breaks, it'll spread like wildfire. But you need to brace yourself, Renee. They're going to come for you, to smear you." Twist the story. Her gaze hardened, her lips curling into a faint, defiant smile. "Let them try. I've faced worse than a few cheap shots. What matters is getting the truth out there and keeping the pressure on." She picked up her phone and dialed, her heart thudding as the line rang. A moment later, a familiar voice crackled through. Maya Ortiz, a civil rights advocate whose name carried weight in every corner of the fight for justice. "Renee, I've been waiting for you to call," Maya said, her tone warm but edged with urgency. "I need your help, Maya," Renee said, skipping the pleasantries. "I'm filing against Miles and the precinct lawful detention, excessive force, systemic misconduct. But this can't just be a courtroom battle. We need the public to see this, to feel it." Maya didn't hesitate. "You've got it. I'll pull in the network activists, lawyers, community leaders. We'll make sure this hits hard and sticks." As Renee hung up, Marcus slid a thick folder across the table, his fingers lingering on the worn edges. "I've been digging," he said, his voice low. "Other cases tied to Miles' patterns of force, complaints that vanished into thin air. It's not just him. These files prove he's no outlier." Renee flipped open the folder, her breath catching as she scanned the page stories of citizens bullied into silence, investigations that dead-ended, bodycam footage that conveniently disappeared. Her eyes darkened, a quiet fury building as she snapped the folder shut. "This is gold," she said, her voice trembling with determination. "If we can show this isn't isolated, it's a battering ram for reform." Marcus stood, his hand resting on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You've got this," he said, his tone a lifeline in the chaos. "Just pace yourself, this is a long haul." She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing. "I know, but every step matters. Let's make this one count." 2 days later, Renee stood outside her office, the sun beating down as she faced a sea of cameras and microphones, flanked by Maya Ortiz and a handful of activists whose faces bore the scars of their own battles. She stepped to the podium, her heart pounding but her voice steady as steel. "Thank you for being here," she began, her words ringing out over the restless crowd. "On the night of March 18th, I was unlawfully detained, harassed, and humiliated by Officer Derek Miles of the 14th Precinct. His actions were vile, but they're not unique. They're the rotten fruit of a system that's been allowed to fester without accountability." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the reporters, their pens scratching furiously. "Today, I'm filing a formal complaint against Miles and his precinct. This isn't just about justice for me, it's about tearing down a system that's failed the people it's sworn to protect." A reporter thrust a hand up, voice cutting through the murmur. "Miss Walker, what reforms are you pushing for?" Renee didn't flinch. "Transparency, buddy cameras that can't be turned off, independent investigations that aren't rigged, and real oversight on discipline. Without that, this cycle of abuse keeps spinning." Another voice piped up, skeptical. "Some say this is personal vendetta. What do you say to that?" Renee's eyes narrowed, her voice sharpening like a blade. "This isn't personal, it's about justice. If standing up for what's right paints a target on my back, I'll wear it proudly. Too many have suffered in the shadows for too long." As the press conference stretched on, the story took root, sprouting across news feeds and TV screens. Headlines blared: "Civil rights attorney Renee Walker targets police corruption." "Unlawful detention ignites reform demands," while the video of Miles's actions ricocheted through social media, outrage swelling with every share. Justice for Renee trended by dusk, pulling in voices from activists to celebrities. Back in her office, Renee burned the midnight oil, assembling her legal team as Marcus filtered in with coffee and updates. "The files are flooding in," he said, his voice thick with awe. "People are coming forward, stories like yours, buried until now." Renee looked up, her eyes glinting with a fire that refused to fade. "Good," she said, her pen scratching across another page. "Let's keep the heat on. Justice doesn't wait, and neither will we." The weight of shared pain pressed heavily on Renee Walker's chest as she scrolled through the flood of messages, pouring in each one a raw, jagged shard of someone else's story, echoing the abuse she'd endured. It was suffocating, the sheer volume of voices crying out. Yet within that storm of despair flickered something fierce, a spark of purpose. Every account of injustice she read steeled her resolve, tightening her grip on the fight ahead. She sat in the dim glow of her living room, the faint hum of the city beyond her window drowned out by the gravity of what she was building. "This isn't just about us anymore," she murmured to herself, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We're not scraping together evidence for a single case, we're laying the foundation for a movement that could shake everything loose." The next morning, her small team gathered around a cluttered table, their faces etched with sleepless resolve as they polished the final draft of the formal complaint. Papers rustled, pens scratched, and the air buzzed with unspoken urgency. When they submitted it, the act felt monumental, like dropping a stone into a still pond, knowing the ripples would spread far beyond their sight. Hours later, the news hit like a thunderclap. The precinct had been served. The media frenzy erupted, cameras flashing outside the station, reporters shouting over one another, and the story clawing its way into every corner of the city. Renee's phone buzzed incessantly, but it was Maya's call that cut through the noise. "The pressure's working," Maya said, her voice crackling with cautious hope. "City officials are squirming, whispering about reviewing police procedures, but you know how they are. They'll stall unless we keep the heat on." Renee's jaw tightened. "We won't let up," she promised, her words a vow carved into the air between them. Days bled into weeks, and the story swelled, gathering momentum like a river carving through stone. Protests sprang up outside the precinct, crowds of people clutching signs, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage and demand. Community meetings, once quiet gatherings, transformed into electric forums where voices long ignored found their strength, debating systemic reform with a hunger for change. For Renee, every step felt like the first breath of a marathon she hadn't trained for, but couldn't afford to lose. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her apartment, she turned to Marcus, her closest ally. "This isn't just my fight," she said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of realization. "It's for every soul who's been crushed into silence, dismissed, or brutalized. We're dragging this ugliness into the light, and we can't stop until it's laid bare. Marcus rested a hand over hers, his touch grounding her. We'll see it through together, he said, his tone unshakable. No matter how long it takes. Renee nodded, her eyes fixed on some distant point, a quiet mantra forming in her mind, one step at a time, but we'll get there. The case didn't stay local for long. It exploded onto the national stage. Renee's name and story morphing into a beacon for those desperate for police reform. The momentum surged, but so did the pushback from those clinging to the old ways, their resistance a thick wall of denial and deflection. The hearing chamber was a pressure cooker when Renee arrived, the air thick with anticipation, every seat filled with lawmakers, community leaders, and citizens whose eyes burned with hope or skepticism. As she stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent, a collective breath held. She glanced at her notes, then lifted her gaze to meet the sea of faces. "My name is Renee Walker," she began, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "And I stand here not just as someone who survived police misconduct, but as a voice for everyone the system has failed it was supposed to shield." She paused, letting the words sink in, feeling the weight of every stare. "What happened to me wasn't a fluke," she continued, her tone unwavering. "It's a crack in a foundation that's been rotting for years. On the night of July 17th, Officer Derek Miles detained me without cause, harassed me, humiliated me, stripped me of my dignity in ways I'll never fully shake. But this isn't about one man's cruelty. It's about the rules and the culture that let him wield power like a weapon, without fear of consequence." A middle-aged lawmaker, his face carved with stern lines, leaned forward, his voice measured but probing. "Miss Walker, what specific changes do you think would stop this from happening again?" Renee didn't hesitate. "Body cameras that can't be switched off during interactions," she said, counting off on her fingers. "Independent oversight boards with real teeth to dig into misconduct claims. Mandatory bias training that actually sticks. And disciplinary records open, public. No more hiding behind secrecy. That's where we start." A woman further down the panel, her expression a mix of curiosity and doubt, cut in. "Some would say that burdens law enforcement too much. What's your answer to that?" Renee's eyes sharpened, her voice rising with conviction. "Accountability isn't a burden, it's the price of power. Officers hold lives in their hands. That authority demands checks to keep it from turning toxic. If protecting people feels like a chore, maybe the problem's not the rules, it's the priorities." The room hummed with reaction, whispers of agreement clashing with grumbles of dissent. A gruff voice from the panel broke through necks, thick with challenge. "Ms. Walker, plenty of folks think this is just one bad incident hyped up too big. What do you say to them?" Renee squared her shoulders, unflinching. "I say open your eyes. Look at the data, hundreds of complaints buried. Families grieving loved ones lost to unchecked force. This isn't one rotten apple. It's a tree with roots so decayed it's poisoning everything it touches." The statement sparked as stormclaps rang out from one side, murmurs of protest from another. Renee pressed forward, undeterred, gesturing to a thick stack of files beside her. "I've got proof right here, case after case of abuse from this precinct alone. Complaints swept under rugs, patterns ignored. A system rigged to shield itself over the people it's meant to serve. Transparency and reform aren't luxuries, they're lifelines." Suddenly, a man in uniform leapt to his feet from the audience, his face red with fury. "This is a smear on all of us," he bellowed. "You're making us all out to be the enemy." Chaos erupted, shouts of support and outrage colliding as the panelists hammered their gavels, demanding order. Renee stood steady, waiting for the uproar to fade. When it did, she locked eyes with the man. "This isn't about vilifying anyone," she said, her voice firm but calm. "It's about owning up. If you're serving with honor, these changes back you up. But if sunlight scares you, maybe it's time to ask why." He sank back into his seat, his anger simmering but unspoken. A panelist turned to her, tone pragmatic. "You've laid it out, Ms. Walker. But let's be real, pushing these reforms through will hit a brick wall of resistance. How do you plan to make it happen?" Renee's resolve didn't flicker. "By not backing down," she said. "By rallying every voice that's been ignored, teaming up with activists, and fighting through every courtroom and street we can. Change isn't handed over, it's clawed out. And it's worth every second of the struggle. As the hearing stretched on, others took the stand, ordinary people with stories that mirrored Renee's, their voices trembling with pain but ringing with defiance. A mother spoke of her son harassed for walking home. An elderly man recounted intimidation that left him shaken. Each tale piled onto the last, a mountain of human cost the panel couldn't ignore. The lawmakers' faces shifted, the reality sinking in deep. Outside, as Renee and Marcus stepped into the evening air, reporters swarmed them, microphones jabbing forward. "Miss Walker, do you think today changes anything?" one shouted. Renee stopped, her expression carved with quiet fire. "It's a start," she said. "We planted something to die a seed. Now it's on all of us to make it grow into justice." Marcus stood beside her, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just one fight or one playsite. It's about every community knowing they can trust the badge. We won't stop until that's real." The crowd pressed closer, but they walked on, their eyes fixed ahead. Later that night, Renee sat alone at her desk, the room cloaked in stillness except for the soft tick of a clock. Before her lay the red cap worn now, its edges frayed from the night that had ignited everything. She reached for it, her fingers tracing the fabric, memories flooding back. That cap had been a quiet rebellion, a personal dare to question everything. Now, it carried the weight of 1,000 voices. Marcus stepped in, setting a steaming mug of tea beside her and leaning against the chair. "You've been staring at that cap forever," he said, half teasing. "What's it saying to you?" Renee exhaled, lifting it in her hands. "It was just me at first," she admitted, her voice soft. "A reminder to think for myself, to push back. But now it's more." Marcus crossed his arms, nodding. "It's theirs too, Renee. The people out there, they are carrying it with you. That cap's not just a hat anymore, it's a flag." She turned it over, her thoughts churning. "Some see it as everything they hate," she said. "Others, they're holding it up like a call to arms." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's how it works, isn't it? You gave it life, and now it's growing into whatever we make it." Renee set it down, her jaw firming. "Then let's make it something unstoppable, something that forces the talks no one wants to have." In that quiet room, the lesson crystallized. Justice wasn't a gift from above, it was a fire stoked by the fearless, and the abuse of power crumbled only when its shadows were burned away. Renee stood by the wide, slightly fogged window of her modest apartment, her silhouette framed against the soft amber glow of the city sprawling below. The streetlights flickered like tired sentinels over a neighborhood that had borne witness to too many broken dreams, too many silent cries swallowed by the weight of unfairness. She pressed her fingertips against the cool glass, her breath forming faint clouds as she exhaled a sigh heavy with resolve. The view wasn't just a landscape, it was a battlefield, a testament to struggles she'd fought and injustices she'd vowed to unravel. Behind her, Marcus's voice broke through the stillness, steady and warm, like a lighthouse cutting through a stormy sea. "You've come so far, Renee," he said, his words carrying the quiet pride of someone who'd watched her claw her way up from the ashes. She turned her head just enough to catch his shadow in the corner of her eye, her lips tightening into a line. "Not far enough," she replied, her tone sharp with the sting of unfinished business. The hearing was a single step, a pebble tossed into a pond. The ripples are there, but the water's still murky. There's so much left to do, so many voices still waiting to break free. Marcus stepped closer, his footsteps soft but deliberate on the creaky wooden floor. He stopped beside her, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling tide of her thoughts. "You've shown them it's possible," he said, his voice unwavering, like a promise etched in stone. "You've proven they don't have to stay quiet, that they can demand something better, something real." His eyes followed hers out to the city, where the lights danced like distant hopes against the dark. Renee turned fully to face him now, her brow furrowing as a storm of doubt churned within her. "But what happens when the spotlight fades?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "When the cameras pack up and the hashtags turn to dust, what then? How do we keep this from becoming just another fleeting tale, another headline people shrug off and forget?" Marcus met her gaze, his dark eyes steady and unyielding. "By never letting up," he said simply. "By making sure this fight burns brighter than any news cycle. You've already done that, Renee." This isn't just your war anymore, it's a wildfire, spreading beyond you. The next day dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with the scent of rain as Renee stepped into the community center. The room buzzed with life rows of folding chairs, packed with people from every corner of the neighborhood. Young kids fidgeted beside weathered elders, their faces a mosaic of hope and weariness. Many wore red caps, identical to the one perched defiantly on Renee's head, a quiet rebellion stitched into every thread. The sight hit her like a wave. Pride swelled in her chest, but beneath it simmered the weight of responsibility. As she approached the microphone, the chatter dissolved into a hush so deep she could hear her own heartbeat thumping in her ears. She lifted her cap, its crimson hue blazing under the harsh fluorescent lights, and held it high. "This cap," she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "started as something small, something mine. It was my way of shouting to the world that I'd never bend to their rules, never let them box me in." But now she paused, her eyes sweeping the room, locking onto faces that mirrored her own fire. "Now it's bigger, it's a shield against the wrongs we've endured, a torch lighting the way through the dark of abuse. Most of all, it's a promise that one day, accountability won't be something we beg for. It'll be the foundation we stand on." The room exploded into applause, a thunderous roar that shook the peeling paint on the walls. Renee felt the energy surge through her, igniting her words with a fiercer edge. "Wearing this cap isn't just a gesture," she continued, her voice rising. "It's a pact to rise up, to speak loud, to fight tooth and nail for what's right. It's a demand to those who swore to serve us, to protect us. They don't get to fail us anymore. We won't settle for scraps when we deserve the whole table." From the crowd, a young woman with braided hair and eyes sharp with determination raised her hand. "Miss Walker," she called, her voice trembling but bold. "What do we do if they don't hear us? If the system just keeps grinding us down?" Renee leaned forward, her gaze locking onto the girls like a lifeline. "Then we fight harder," she said, her words ringing with steel. "Change isn't a gift handed to use, it's a garden we cultivate with sweat and stubbornness. Every voice we raise, every step we take, it's a brick in the wall of the world we're building. Together, nothing can stop us." That evening, the sky draped the city in a blanket of quiet stars as Renee sat on her porch, the red cap resting in her lap like a sleeping warrior. Marcus joined her, easing onto the weathered steps with a sigh. The night wrapped around them, cool and still, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. "You did good today," he said, his voice soft but firm, a balm against the raw edges of her day. Renee traced the cap's stitching with her thumb, her mind still racing. "It's not enough," she murmured. "It never feels like enough." Marcus tilted his head, studying her with that steady patience she'd come to rely on. "What you're doing, it's bigger than one day, one speech," he said. "You're planting something, Renee. Seeds that'll grow roots deeper than you can see." She looked at him, her eyes fierce with a fire that refused to dim. "Then we've got to make sure those roots hold," she said, her voice low but resolute. "We can't let this slip away. We can't stop." Marcus reached over, his hand finding hers, warm and grounding. "We won't," he promised. "This is just the start." Renee lifted the cap, staring at it as if it held the weight of every battle yet to come. Then, with a quiet determination, she set it back on her head, the gesture a silent vow. "Let's make it mean something," she said, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Side by side, they sat beneath the vast night sky, the road ahead looming large and treacherous. Yet for the first time in years, Renee felt the burden shift, not gone, but carried together. The red cap, once a solitary cry, had become a beacon, and with Marcus at her side, she was ready to take it beyond the city, to a stage that could shake the nation. Days later, the air in the packed auditorium crackled with restless energy, a hum of voices rising from the sea of people pressed shoulder to shoulder. Backstage, Renee adjusted the red cap, her fingers trembling not with nerves, but with the electric pulse of purpose. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the crowd's roar, but she could feel it vibrating through her bones. Marcus stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a tether to keep her steady. "You've got this," he said, his voice a calm harbor in the storm of her thoughts. She nodded, her jaw tight with determination. "This isn't just mine anymore," she said, almost to herself. It never was. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, rich and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome civil rights attorney Renee Walker." The curtains parted, and the crowd's cheers crashed over her like a tidal wave as she stepped into the spotlight. The red cap gleamed, a vivid splash of color that drew every gaze. She reached the podium, her eyes scanning the ocean of faceless activists with clenched fists, community leaders with notebooks poised, ordinary folks with hope flickering in their tired eyes. This was her army, forged from shared pain and unyielding will. "Tonight," she began, her voice steady, but laced with a fire that could melt steel. "I stand here not as a victim, but as a warrior for justice, for accountability, for every voice that's been choked into silence for too long. What happened to me wasn't a fluke, it was a symptom of a system rotting at its core. A system that's turned its back on the people it was built to shield." She paused, letting her words sink into the room, her gaze piercing through the haze of lights. "But we're here to fix that," she went on, her tone lifting with defiance. "We're here to demand Morennet just for ourselves, but for the kids who'll inherit what we leave behind. This isn't the end of the road, it's where we start running." The crowd erupted, their cheers a gust of wind pushing her forward. "These past months," she continued, "we've seen what happens when we stand together. Communities rising like a tide, demanding answers, demanding change. Laws drafted, committees born, accountability finally cracking through the silence. But don't get comfortable, this is just the first breath. We've got to keep shouting." She glanced at the notes she'd scribbled earlier, then pushed them aside. This wasn't a script, it was her soul laid bare. "This isn't about one precinct, one city, one state," she said, her voice raw with conviction. "It's about forging a system that doesn't just preach dignity, it lives it. A system where the law doesn't bend to bias or break under prejudice. That starts with us, right here, right now." Her tone shifted, hardening as she turned her words toward the powers that had tried to bury her, and to those clutching the old ways, who see accountability as a knife at their throat. "Shear me. We're not fading. We'll hold your feet to the fire, drag your shadows into the light, and we won't rest until the people you swore to serve can look you in the eye without fear." The applause surged again, a wave crashing against the stage, and Renee felt it lift her. From the wings, Marcus watched, his chest tight with a pride he couldn't voice. He'd been there through the midnight arguments, the endless strategy sessions, the days when despair threatened to drown her. Now, seeing her stand tall, her voice a clarion call, he felt the enormity of what they'd built together. When she finished, he stepped onto the stage, the crowd's roar swelling as he joined her. Their unity was a portrait of strength, unshakable and fierce. Marcus leaned into the microphone, his voice deep and resonant. "What you saw tonight," he said, "is what happens when courage locks arms with belief. This fight isn't just Renesed, it's ours. And together, we're unstoppable." The crowd's response was deafening, a testament to the fire they'd lit. In the weeks that followed, Renee's speech rippled across the country like a stone skipping over water. Clips flooded the internet, news anchors dubbed her a torchbearer for justice, and the red cap sprouted at rallies and protests like wildflowers after rain. Laws began to shift, body cameras became mandatory in a handful of states, oversight boards took root, and whispers of reform grew into shouts in government halls. But with every step forward came a pushback, entrenched officials digging in their heels, smear campaigns flickering across screens, the system groaning under the strain of change. Months later, Renee stood on the steps of the Capitol, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows over a crowd that stretched beyond sight. Red caps dotted the sea of people, banners fluttering with demands for fairness and renewal. She adjusted the cap on her head, its weight a comfort now, and raised her voice over the wind. "This isn't just a movement," she declared, her words soaring like hawks above the throng. "This is a reckoning, a call for a future that doesn't just promise better, it delivers it. And we won't stop until it's ours." Down in the crowd, Marcus watched, his heart pounding with a mix of awe and resolve. Renee's fist rose, a signal of solidarity, and the crowd answered with a roar that shook the earth. Her imagine bowed, fierce, the red cap a crown of defiance burned itself into history. It wasn't the end of a fight, but the dawn of a new war, one she and Marcus would wage together. Their story stretched beyond them, a lesson carved in the stone of human will. It spoke of resilience that refused to crack, of unity that turned whispers into thunder, of consequences that shadowed those who twisted power for their own gain. Justice, they showed, wasn't a gift from above, it was a flame tended by hands willing to burn. The red cap, once a solitary spark, had ignited a blaze, and its glow promised a reckoning for every abuse left unchecked.